What's up, guys? This is Concordant TCG back with another video, and today I will be going over my thoughts on this set 18 meta. Is this a tier list? Is this a meta overview? I feel like these metas happen really fast, and so it's better if content creators like myself can get these out very early. But then there's oftentimes a higher chance of us just being wrong. So I actually took a lot of time with this one, reviewing footage, testing decks myself, and making sure I can give you guys educated opinions on the decks in the current meta. With that being said, we're going to go over the tier list guidelines, which will just kind of help us look at this from a particular perspective. Tier list guidelines. Number one, I'm just one person talking about PNG cards on the internet. If your favorite deck isn't well represented on the tier list, or you don't agree with my placement on some of the decks, that's okay. This is meant to be a starting point for discussion rather than an end point. Number two, not every deck will be represented on the tier list. There's just too many really cool and unique concepts in Zero, and there's not enough time in one video to go over all of the decks. So if you want me to go over more like mechanic specific stuff, I could do that, but I would just let me know in the comments if you want that. Number three, tier lists. Specifically, this tier list will be described in proximity and strength, meaning if a deck is an A tier, it's a lot closer to S tier, which means it's a lot stronger. And we want to look at things not necessarily like this one boss monster is really strong. We want to look at this one boss monster is really strong. How does other decks, either really strong ones or really weak ones, interact with this? Do they even get to interact at all? Finally, play whatever the hell you want. We play this game to have fun, not to meet like a prize quota or tournament win quota. If that's what you're about, then maybe this can help you prepare for events. Otherwise, hopefully we can get a good discussion started on this. Let's get to it. Okay. So I'll start from the bottom and kind of go up to the top of the tier list. We're going to start off with the C- tier. Frankly, only Nirvana. I did a lot of extensive testing on this, and if you're looking for a really cool fun deck, after spending multiple hours climbing the tower event, then this could be an option for you. I actually built 3 different deck profiles for this, and it is on the channel, so take a look at that if you'd like. Frankly, reasons why I think this is probably the worst deck in this meta, especially with new cards included, is it doesn't synergize well with most of the red decks, so you gotta play in like Kami or Kagero, but even in decks like Kagero, it feels like the other cards in the deck overshadow Nirvana. So if you're trying to play a deck that highlights Nirvana, you're gonna have a hard time making one that actually wins games. So yeah, it does just feel like a limit break style deck in a Legion format, and you can really feel the power creep even though it's technically a brand new card. So yeah, you hate to see it, but we're gonna put it in C tier, or should I say C-. Next, we're gonna go to B tier. I've grouped this by non-Legion decks and Legion decks. We'll start off with the non-Legion decks. Let's see. This is kind of vanilla, and there's other decks that do what Aquaforce wants to do now, and we're only getting more stuff that can negate PGs and do all the stuff that Aquaforce has been doing for a very long time. And this deck gets easily hard countered in comparison to some of the other stuff in the meta, so it just feels really hard to play this deck right now. Although, frankly, if you're Aquaforce main, you're probably fine. It's really just matchup specific stuff that holds this back, in the fact that you got to try really hard. BT and OTT, like specifically Tsukiyomi. BT feels a little bit slower this month than it did the month previously, but it still does get 4 PGs. If you can find a heal or two, or just have some decent triggers, the deck can feel really strong. And I really do feel like right now it's your best build is the hybrid build, so that being Pacifica, duos, and like a Prism mix. So duos being your PG finders and a couple of those pieces, Prisms to help you build columns, and Pacifica to give you great multi-attack options in the late game. Legion decks though, Angel Feathers, their saving grace here is that they have 5 heals, and Legion really does abuse that, but it's on the contingency that you actually hit your heals, which just doesn't happen enough. I did test this one extensively, and I tried a bunch of different builds. And frankly, like just as an aside, the legions for angels, they feel like watered down versions of older boss monsters, so you lose utility for the legion skill. And I just don't know how I feel about that. It makes it harder to play the deck, but it's not terrible. You have 5 heals and you're legioning. Great Nature is inconsistent, and although it can pop off and on the best days, it can feel like an A or A+ deck. The other half of the time it's here, so I feel like B is just a nice place to put it. I really like this deck. Would I enter a tournament with this? Yes, but it's definitely a deck that you gotta work really hard to get your wins on. And then we have Tachikaze and Nubatamas. Nubatamas are here because on paper they're really good and their effects are very strong, but they run out of resources really fast, so it really requires you to high roll, and you can't always bet on a high roll every single game to win you games. So for that reason, we put it in B tier. We also have Tachikaze here, which it's a great crit deck, and now they have Legion, but their whole mechanic of using CB to retire cards to reset columns is very roundabout, and you got to work really hard and really know what you're doing, so it's just a high effort, average reward kind of deck, but it does have great pushing power because of its crits, because of the other stuff in the toolkit. Next, we'll go to the A tier. There's not much here. And again, within the tiers, it's not ordered. I want to preface that again. Yeah, these three. CBD, Jewel Knights, and Gold Paladins. Ezreal is super strong right now because it's going to punish your break right decks, and some of these rush decks that tend to be a little bit more frail can't find PGs. It's there for those kind of matchups. Jewel Knights, it's still super consistent, but I think over time we'll start to see a fall. You gotta wait to set 21 for the really good support, but for now it's just a really consistent deck that finds PGs and grade 2s, but kind of struggles to push. So that's their downfall. Doesn't make them bad. They're still really good, especially if you're not feeling Seekers. I would suggest you try this. And then CBD, it's a golds meta, lots of libs, lots of Ezreal, and it'll kind of get bullied for that reason, but outside of those decks, it does great, and most decks are actually kind of taking out their unlockers, which means you as a CBD or LJ player have more opportunities to bully them and keep their stuff locked, which is good for you. In the A+ tier, I'm going to sort this by Legion and non-Legion decks, not in order. Something like this. Yeah. So let's go over the break right decks. So we got like Kagero, Revengers, and Novas. Kagero and Revengers, they feel very similar. They both are really good at pushing damage and like pushing through intercepts and PGs. And Kagero does get the benefit as being one of those kind of eternal decks that's just always in the meta. And Legion being about a turn slower, it has more time to set up, similar to like how Sook has an extra turn to set up, which is really good now. And even BT benefits from that. Not a bad deck, but it's just very piece reliant, and it's not as consistent as I would want it to be. If I had to pick, I'd probably play Revengers over Kagero if I wanted that break red kind of experience. I just feel like the deck's a lot more consistent, and it's got a couple ways to play it that are both really easy to execute. It's got great finishers too. Blau won Springfest, and just because we got some new toys to play with the Novas, doesn't mean that this deck still isn't dumb. If you're at 3 damage and you have 2 intercepts and 3 PGs, you're most likely going to lose anyways. And I think that we can't ignore that. Sometimes I feel like it's here, but it's a little too high rolly. It's actually a lot more consistent though than people give it credit for. So I'm putting Blaus in A+. Onto the Legion decks that I think are kind of like in that fringe tier. We got Risers, Brawlers, and Seekers. A lot of people put Seekers here, and it's just too clunky. If it was more streamlined, I think that it would be easy S+ or, S tier deck. But everything's too CB, its countercharger is awkward, and I feel like because the Legion requirement is so clunky in this deck, like Lien just doesn't feel as good as a Soul Blast draw card kind of skill. You often have times where you have to overcommit your hand to get your Legion, or wait a turn and risk like being out-tempoed. And not only that, but it's like a half pick up and play kind of deck, because Since everything is 2 CB, you'll often find that you don't have enough CB to do everything you want, so as a Seekers player, you have to decide what plays are essential for you to get the win and what plays are actually going to waste CB and make it to where you can't close out games. Brawlers, they push for days. They have the counter, the Soul Blast draw card, and that's really good. I mean, it's just another good Narukami deck. I actually, between all the new decks, I struggle the most against Narukami and Genesis, just on like a deck matchup, just because of how strong the card pool is. As far as like just personal player struggles, I struggle the most with Risers because I've never been good at fighting Nova Grapplers. Finally, we're going to go into the S tier, and then I'll kind of break down these decks in this S tier here more in depth. I have 3 decks here. We have Gance Revolution, Maricica.Deck, and we have Yggdrasil.Deck. So let's go ahead and break these down. So Liberators. Liberators is a cool deck. I personally despise Golds, but that's just a personal thing. If you like Golds, it's a really good time to be playing Libs right now. It's got great finishers in the form of Zenith, and I didn't put it here, but the Fridge is also extremely good. They also always have access to Blaster Blade Liberator, which means constant retire to think about, and they have the counter charger that synergizes well. This deck can push for days. Gancelot is also a really strong heal, and it not only works aggressively for like just call on Vanguard and swing and PG check a bunch of times, but you can easily put this back in the deck and really get rewarded. Also, if you call this, you call a Blaster Blade Liberator. We all know this. It's annoying. It's good. And finally, it's really easy to build boards, so because everything basically superior calls in this deck and or complements Blaster Blade's retire skill, it just promotes the player to push. You don't really get hardcore punished for dropping cards because you have so many ways to build board. Like Garmor's is CB2 call 5. Yeah. There's that. Cons, it's affected by CV starving. I couldn't really think of anything else. Sometimes it won't find PGs, but I think this deck's fairly consistent, and it doesn't rely on the normal Gancelot break ride. But typically, like, you can give them 2 counterblasts instead of 3 in the late game, and they'll have to choose between doing Blaster Blade or like Zenith or Garmor. They won't be able to do everything they want, and that's pretty cool for you as the opponent. Next, we got Pale Moon. Pale Moon is pretty good. Does it deserve to be nerfed? Probably. The fact it's just one of those things where you have to play certain decks to beat it. I've kind of made the conscious decision to play decks and work around beating Pale Moon as often as possible. But some people have favorite decks where that's not the option. Maricica and Anna are goated, and they basically help you push whether you're in Limit Break or not in Limit Break. It has easy access to crossride numbers, and that's really good because then most decks can't scale well, especially a deck as popular as Seekers can sometimes struggle to scale. And having that crossride number can be the difference between you losing a game and winning a game. And column scaling is absolutely amazing. Your Reverse Lukier and your Venus Lukier get plus 5k every single time you call something from Soul. This means that as the Pale Moon player, you're just going to have really massive columns. Your opponent's offensives aren't going to matter once you start swinging with the Lion and Vanguard. And yeah, it's kind of big dumb. So I know a lot of people are excited for those nerfs. We'll see how the deck does when it gets its changes. Cons is you gotta RNG in the PGs in hard matchups, specifically like decks with crits or decks that push really well. Even in the mirror match is a little awkward. Because it doesn't draw PGs, it can feel like a glass cannon, but when you can 2-6 someone, it's pretty good. You'll probably be fine either way. And yeah, it's weak to crits and CB starving. I think decks like Seekers, Pale Moon, and Kagero are probably the 3 most susceptible decks to CB starving because those decks typically need Counterblast to play the game, so if you just don't give it to them, they don't get to do any of their fancy effects, and they start becoming vanilla decks, which is just something to think about if you're struggling still against those kind of decks. Genesis. I don't think the slide really does justice to how good this deck is right now. So let's break it down. A couple of pros is that Legion fixes deckout problems and helps recycle PGs and heals. It depends on the wave of Genesis, but it's either like really selective soul charging focused, or it's just like just soul charge 3 and call it a day, just YOLO it. And that can be a problem, especially in the older sets, because you just soul charge heals and PGs some games. And although you could push for days, you wouldn't have the PGs and stuff to live if for some reason your opponent happened to get 2 to 3 PGs or found their heals. And that was really frustrating for a lot of Genesis players. With that being said though, it has great offenses, so it's got a grade 3 for every scenario. Yggdrasil denies PGs, Iwa Nagahime, and even the new Regalia crossride, the double rare. It's board wipes. You have the Restander Minerva, which helps dig for PGs, and PGs check herself. And yeah, you got like Nyx and Yggdrasil to like help push crits. This deck has everything. I really like this deck. It's really strong, and it's probably the one I have the hardest time against. It also has a good time against Ezel too, because of its grade 2 Hesperus, which when you Soul Blast that, you're going to be able to retire stuff. So it's even got board control in it too. Cons is it's kind of high rolly. It's still Genesis, it's still a deck that relies on Soul, which means sometimes you're just not going to hit those pieces, and it's going to feel bad. But there are ways to kind of get around that, like playing the break ride and a couple other things. So that's Genesis. Well, with that being said, this is the set 18 tier list. Again, these are just my opinions. Don't take anything too hard, but if you do disagree with anything, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion. There will even be a link where you guys can make your own version of this tier list, and you guys can @me on Twitter, and I can like see visuals of your opinions, which is really good for discussion. With that said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Vanguard Zero content. This is Kokorin TCG, signing off.